Kim Jong-un does want economic development, but on his terms. And the only reason he wants it is not because he cares about the people of North Korea. Like, he definitely does not care about the people of North Korea. But he wants people's living standards to rise a little bit so that he can take the credit for it, so he can keep his job for longer.
If I can help people to make deals, that's great. But if I can help people not to make deals that shouldn't be doing it, maybe that's just as good.
Everybody wants to make a deal. I want to make a deal, very big deal. I think North Korea wants to make a deal. But it's got to be a fair deal. Probably, I guess you'd say, the largest deal ever made. And if it is a deal, it's going to be a real deal.
How do you strike a deal? How do you stand tall, uncross those arms, and become a closer? That's been a part of Donald Trump's spiel ever since the days of his old NBC show, The Apprentice. But what does it mean when you're the president? Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer. Yes, I am. Sometimes I forget. And today, I'm going to focus on the ways Trump is changing U.S. foreign policy by, well, largely running it himself. And then I'll sit down with a woman on the front lines of that go-it-alone approach, whose latest book is brimming with exclusive details of a dictator that President Trump has already met with twice. Beijing bureau chief for the Washington Post, Anna Fifield, is here. Then I've got your puppet regime.
And then the president called her chief of staff into the room, and he told her that the leaks were coming from inside the house.
But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. President Trump is not what you might call a consensus builder. He favors bilateral deals, not multilateral agreements where he's only one guy and he gets surrounded. He ditched the Trans-Pacific Partnership, has been involved in a flurry of one-on-one negotiations from South Korea and the United Kingdom to Japan and India. He did update NAFTA, though it hasn't been confirmed yet, and has rallied support against Maduro in Venezuela. But by and large, Trump has a penchant for the mano a mano. And no one is off limits. Let's break it down. Kim Jong-un, they've met twice.
And we go back and forth, and then we fell in love, okay?
How about Iranian President Hassan Rouhani?
Do you have preconditions for that meeting?
No preconditions, no. They want to meet, I'll meet.
Of course, Trump's already met privately with Vladimir Putin.
What I say to him is none of your business.
But what comes of it? Tensions with Iran are still growing. Russia still has every incentive to meddle in the next U.S. election, though whether or not they still want Trump is an open question. And Kim, last time I checked, he's still got his nuclear arsenal. And he's still throwing people into gulags, which is not nice. After all that time spent arranging the second summit in Vietnam, Trump's inability to squeeze even minor concessions from Kim Jong-un is a bit of a letdown. In fact, according to what we now know from U.S. intelligence, North Korea's scientists may actually have constructed 12 new nuclear weapons since that meeting. That would bring North Korea's new tally to as much as 60 nuclear bombs. But while Kim rules like father, using fear and intimidation tactics to keep his subordinates in line or else, he's also at times proven more open than his predecessors, even taking questions from Western journalists. Check this out.
자신 있으십니까?
Well, it's too early to tell.
Does that mean there's still a chance for diplomacy? Pried open by President Trump's inclination to meet anybody? That's a question best left for a woman who's been regularly traveling to North Korea for the past 14 years. Let's get to it.
I was hoping that the Kim Jong-un puppet would be here. This could have been my opportunity to interview Kim Jong-un.
That would have been awesome. Wonderful to be here with Anna Fifield, Washington Post charged Beijing correspondent and author of the excellent new book, The Great Successor, all about Kim Jong-un, North Korea. You've traveled there more than any Western correspondent, yeah?
Not quite, but I have been there 12 times over a period, like I started going in 2005. So I've got this kind of historical, background there that I can see the changes taking place.
The big news that you broke is that the half-brother of Kim Jong-un, the one that was poisoned to death, you say was working with the CIA.
Yeah, that's right. That's one of the things I discovered during the course of my reporting, that Kim Jong-nam, who was the older half-brother of Kim Jong-un, somebody who Kim Jong-un very much viewed as a threat, even though he showed absolutely no interest in running the country, he had been working as an informant for the CIA and possibly also the South Korean intelligence services for some time, providing information to them about the North Korean regime, which he kept in close contact with, not his brother, but other senior people there. And perhaps the CIA was also looking at him as somebody who could be a replacement for Kim Jong-un, somebody they could install in North Korea as kind of a friendlier dictator there.
Do you have any reason to believe that was known by Kim Jong-un?
We don't know for sure. We can assume that the North Koreans were keeping very, very close contact on him and would be trying to hack and monitor him as well. They may well have known about this. But either way, Kim Jong-un had, reasons in his own Machiavellian mind to try and want to take out his brother, because his brother, as the scion of this mythical bloodline, could also theoretically claim the right to lead North Korea. And, he had also been criticizing Kim Jong-un kind of obliquely, but, Kim Jong-un won't tolerate any criticism at all. Kim Jong-un already had plenty of reason to try and dispatch with him.
Now, Kim Jong-nam, it was said at the time that he was under the protection of the Chinese. So kind of interesting that while he's under the protection of the Chinese and seen to be the guy they want to make sure is okay in Singapore and when he travels, he's actually talking to the CIA. Do you believe that there was communication on that front?
Wow, that's tricky to say. But, one thing about that is that, so Kim Jong-nam was based between Beijing and the Chinese enclave of Macau.
Yeah.
The North Koreans were really careful not to assassinate him on Chinese territory. And in fact, when those North Korean hitmen, the people who arranged the assassination, when they left Kuala Lumpur, they flew via Indonesia, Dubai, Russia, back into North Korea. They avoided Chinese territory because they knew the Chinese would be super upset about this. I think we don't know how much communication there was between the Chinese and the Americans on this. Probably not any, given the state of relations between them. But somebody like Kim Jong-nam, who is in exile from the regime, he's probably on the take. He would probably be talking to any intelligence service that would pay him.
Now, do you think, there's been a big flap about the fact that President Trump, upon hearing of this, said, well, I wouldn't support that. And, mainstream media comes back and says, well, that's Trump, that's basically undermining the CIA, supporting the North Koreans. Is there a sense to also thinking this is a message that would be welcomed by the Chinese?
Yeah, the Chinese would welcome it for sure, but also the North Koreans. CIA analysts call North Korea the hardest of all the hard targets. There's almost no human intelligence on what's happening inside North Korea. So the idea that the American president would send a message to his, bromance buddy Kim Jong-un, don't worry, we won't collect any intelligence on you, is like cause for celebration in Pyongyang.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we did have all that intelligence, it hasn't seemed to have helped in terms of bilateral diplomacy with the North Koreans.
Yeah, what's the counterfactual, though? Would it have been so much worse without it? Who knows?
So what do we know about how Kim Jong-un governs now, about how different he is from his father, about how different he is from the way he is perceived in the West?
Yeah, in some respects, he governs in exactly the same way as his father and his grandfather before him, and using fear, instilling fear into the top ranks of the regime to keep everybody loyal to him. So both Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il purged and had executed many, many senior officials. And Kim Jong-un has done that too, not just his uncle, but other senior officials, the propaganda chief, the head of the army, the defense minister, apparently blown to a pulp with anti-aircraft guns. He has used these same tactics to instill fear into people and, send a pretty powerful deterrent message. Don't even think about challenging me and my rule. But then he has also proven himself to be a much more outgoing and unconventional, gregarious leader than certainly his father ever was. I mean, his father ruled for 17 years, spoke in public only one time, and even then it was one sentence, like a regime slogan.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly taking questions from the media.
He was not. Kim Jong-un is taking questions from the media.
Which is kind of shocking.
Shocking. I almost fell off my chair when my colleague at the Washington Post asked him that first question in Hanoi. And then since then, Kim Jong-un has been talking to the Russian media and things. This is astounding. I mean, baby steps, but still huge change in a North Korean dictator context. So we see that's like a superficial example of what he's doing more deeply, like being willing to travel to Singapore, to Hanoi, to meet Donald Trump.
To South Korea for the Olympics.
That's
to
right.
To Vladivostok, I guess it was.
Yeah, that he has been willing to go out. But what I found really interesting about Hanoi is that they announced that in advance that Kim Jong-un was going, which they hadn't done with Singapore. That's a really risky thing because then, he had to explain when he came back why there was no deal, right? So he has been much bolder and more willing to take these big risks than anyone before.
Yeah, now, apparently, again, according to the news reports, bigger risks taken by the principal negotiators than by Kim Jong-un,
Yes.
But only came initially from that one South Korean outlet. Any reason to believe that that is indeed the case or not?
Or not, yeah. My reporting has told me that these two officials who were named, three officials who were named, have all been placed under investigation. Two people from the United Front Department, North Korea's outward-facing organization, they have been arrested, house arrest, I guess. They've certainly disappeared from the scene. Kim Yong-chol, who was Kim Jong-un's envoy, he came to the Oval Office. He has disappeared, he has returned, he has kept the same status the whole time, so he hasn't been stripped of his roles.
And no one has been executed.
No one has been executed so far as we know.
So that news was all false.
No, but people have been executed before.
Yes, that news.
Yes, but in this case, no.
Yes. So, Kim Jong-un, before this opening, before the trip to South Korea, hadn't traveled anywhere.
No.
Hadn't met with any leaders.
Right.
So, did you have any indications that he was going to move in this direction? Because it did seem from everyone watching it from afar, and I've never been to North Korea, to be quite shocking.
The big clue came to me on November 29th, 2017. That is North Korea's last ICBM test, and they announced that they had completed their rocket program. And so for me, that was the sign. He was done with the nuclear side of the equation. He was now ready to turn to diplomacy and economic development. And lo and behold, barely a month later, he stood up for his New Year's Day address and said he's willing to talk with South Korea. And
focused a lot on economics as opposed to national security in that talk as well. Yeah,
exactly. They pivoted away from the nuclear side of things. And that set in train this remarkable course of events. We saw his, sister, sometimes called the Ivanka Trump of North Korea, come out to South Korea to the Olympics. This meeting.
Met with Pence, sort of, not really.
They stood in the same area and, studiously avoided each other. Right. But then, Kim Jong-un he had agreed to meet Moon Jae-in. He'd invited him to talks.
The South Korean president.
That's right. That set and process the talks with Donald Trump. But first, he knew, he had been ignoring Xi Jinping for some 6 years by that stage. He knew he had to go and pay homage to North Korea's traditional benefactor. He went to China first, and then suddenly he'd met everybody.
Since that opening, have you seen things open at all domestically? Has there been a reflection on we're going to allow a freer economy in any way? I know they're opening markets, for example, locally, but can you feel like that this is somewhat less of a totalitarian regime internally since there's been more engagement externally?
Absolutely not.
Not at all?
Not at all. Kim Jong-un does want economic development, but on his terms. And the only reason he wants it is not because he cares about the people of North Korea. He definitely does not care about the people of North Korea. But he wants people's living standards to rise a little bit so that he can take the credit for it, so he can keep his job for longer. But he's doing this on his own terms. Like, he's not going to throw open the doors. Even, Chinese-style so-called reform and opening is too much for North Korea. So I think he is going to very carefully and cautiously crack open North Korea, maybe to foreign investment. Chinese investment would be the ideal situation because Chinese don't ask pesky questions about human rights and that kind of thing.
Nor does the U.S. at this point.
True, but he does want those sanctions off so that trade and money can flow more freely than they have for the past few years.
When you say he clearly does not care about the North Korean people, I mean, on the one hand, obviously, given the conditions they're living under. On the other hand, here's a guy that was born into this regime, has to be looking, over his shoulder at every moment thinking, if I don't maintain control, these elites are going to come and kill me. What makes us so clear that that he doesn't care?
Okay, when I say he doesn't care about the people, he doesn't care about the masses. He does care about those elites, that 0.1% in Pyongyang that keeps him in power. And he has made a lot of effort to enrich them or to let them enrich themselves through corruption. They're all taking money on the side of various deals. Every time one of these big high-rises goes up in Pyongyang, some dodgy officials are taking a cut from that. So he's very much allowed those people to get better, to have even more reason than ever to support his leadership. But he hasn't really done anything to tend to the 99% out there outside of Pyongyang. He has tolerated markets, and that has allowed people to earn their own way to a better living, but he hasn't completely unshackled them, and he certainly has not let up on the police state that keeps them under political control.
Now, I mean, we've spoken with a lot of people that defected from North Korea, got to the South. Have you had any opportunity to have any direct exposure to regular North Korean citizens in North Korea?
Yes, I have. I mean, I have traveled there 12 times, but these people are officials, minders, government people.
That's what I'm saying. Just any regular people.
Yeah, but then I have been to sports events and I have, I've walked the streets and things. For me, as a journalist, my natural predilection, right, is to go up and talk to people and engage people in conversation. Yeah, in North Korea, they run away from you. When I do that, I put them in danger. People are going to report that I talk to them. So I tend not to do it beyond, chit-chat. So when I've been, I was at this tug-of-war event and everybody's happy and out there and taking videos with their smartphones. So I'll talk to them, ask the kids how old they are, laugh with them, but I'm not going to ask them, how much food did you get to eat today? Or do you really think your leader's such a great guy? No.
Do you ever get a sense from your minders that their guard's down a little bit?
Not that their guard is down. I mean, sometimes they have tried to show me what ordinary people they are, and, they'll talk about their kids. And, I mean, they are, the kind of people who are minding me are ordinary people, though they are in the regime. They are humans doing their job, trying to keep tabs on me. But certainly I don't ask them anything political because it's just too dangerous. When we journalists go, we always have two minders. They mind each other as well as minding me.
That's the safer way to go, right? I mean, historically that's been true when you talk to Chinese diplomats as well. They need to be in twos to make sure no one's...
I need to be responsible as a journalist, right? Like, no story. I don't want a cheap line in a story and have somebody sent off to the gulag.
Absolutely. So let's widen the lens a little bit because you're based in Beijing. The relationship between China and North Korea, on the one hand, has been historically one that has been useful for the Chinese. On the other hand, they've gotten increasingly irked when North Koreans behave in ways that are embarrassing or autonomous. And it was interesting when President Trump came in and started focusing on this, the Chinese were much more willing to really ramp up their sanctions against North Korea. How does North Korea look from the Chinese perspective today? How has it changed since then?
I think, China wants this process, wants this diplomatic engagement. They do not want nuclear tests and missile launches and things. So I think China is now looking to give North Korea some easy victories, like to encourage them to down this path. They do want economic, Chinese-style economic reform inside North Korea. And we've seen on the 4 visits now that Kim Jong-un has made to China, they have taken him around, factories, to a transportation center, a medicine factory and things that they have been trying to show the example of how his economy could develop. So they do definitely want to push him down that road. But it's surprising that they are still enforcing sanctions to a surprising degree up on the border there. They do want to show Donald Trump that they are willing to play ball in terms of keeping North Korea on the straight and narrow.
Have they started letting some of the North Koreans back into those joint ventures? Because I know a lot of money was coming back into North Korea from China. That was a big source of income for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But they really cut that back. Is that shifting?
A little. There are some low level, smaller businesses and things are still trading and investing in North Korea. But at a state level, the really big guns, SOEs, none of that is happening.
Do you think the Chinese feel reasonably comfortable with both Kim Jong-un and with their relationship with North Korea today?
Xi Jinping, there is no love lost with Kim Jong-un. Despite the smiles recently, he thinks he's this, little punk next door who doesn't do as he's told by China. And I think that has not changed. Everything that's happening is purely pragmatic now. Xi Jinping wants Kim Jong-un to remain in charge. They want that regime to stay in place, for North Korea to remain intact so that he doesn't have millions of hungry refugees flowing over the border, so that he doesn't have the American troops in South Korea coming all the way up.
All the historical issues.
Yeah. I mean, he would like to be able to ignore North Korea, I think, to not have them provoking the outside world, to not have them making any trouble. So if he can get to that stage and have them just ticking along, I think he'd be happy.
So having now had the 2 summits with President Trump and it not moving anywhere, but Trump also not putting a lot of additional pressure on, would China be just happy with that status quo going forward for a while?
Yeah, I think they would. I mean, the things are nice and quiet. And I think China's incentive to help the United States on anything whatsoever has completely been sapped by this trade war.
Sure.
They're not going to do the
and
US
not
any
just
favors
the
right
war.
now.
Yeah. I mean, we've got Huawei, we've got
Exactly.
Taiwan, we've got Hong Kong. There are a lot of things.
The whole shebang.
But not North Korea.
South China Sea,
But not North Korea. So you would say North Korea is actually one of the areas of stability of the U.S.-China relationship right now.
China always wanted the freeze for freeze, this idea that North Korea would stop its nuclear testing and the South Koreans and Americans would stop their military exercises.
Which they basically have now.
They have it. Yeah.
So they're happy.
They're very happy.
Now, no matter how good or bad relations between the U.S. and China have been over the past 10, 20, 30 years, Chinese elites still really wanted their kids to go to American schools. They wanted to buy real estate in the United States. Are you starting to see that perception change in China?
The government in China wants people to think that. They have put out warnings in the last few weeks, warning Chinese students about going to America.
And stuff like that.
That you may be detained.
First time they've done that, right?
Yeah, first time they've put out the warnings about their social media being checked, about being harassed at border points and things, saying that they may be in danger in the US. They also put out a warning to tourists as well. They said there are a lot of shootings and violence in America. Think twice about going there. So they are using education and tourism as weapons now in this trade war. Having said that, Chinese students still do want to come to America. I talked to a kid the other day who's gotten into Princeton and was thrilled about it. So this remains very aspirational for Chinese students.
Anna Fifield.
Yeah.
Wonderful to be with you.
Great. Thank you for having me on, Ian.
And now for something completely different, I've got your puppet regime.
And then the president called her chief of staff into the room and he told her that the leaks were coming from inside the house.
Yeah, that's not scary. President should just have the leaker shot.
No, you don't understand. The scary part is that the president was a woman.
Oh, no, that's just implausible. That's scary.
Fine, Kim. You tell one.
On a night just like tonight, there was a cruel and beautiful little boy. And he discovered that many, many people wanted to kill him simply because he was a dangerous nuisance.
Did his dad think so too?
Let me finish! The scary part is that the beautiful boy didn't have a nuclear weapon to defend himself.
Shh. I promise I'll never let that happen to you.
You promise.
Do you hear that?
Hey guys, I was just chopping up some firewood for s'mores.
And that is our show this week. Wasn't it awesome? Didn't you enjoy it? Moose the dog was like, yes, that's a great show. Just give me food. Don't miss next week's show. It's gonna be even better. There might be some moose. In the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out on GZEROmedia.com.